Shalom, shalom, Yisrael. This is Yered Yao and the news. Shalom, shalom, y'all. Peace and blessings from where I am to wherever you guys are. This is Yered Yao with Hebrew News. So you guys will recognize that when we look at the Bible, we're looking at real history. We're looking at real life. We're looking at real events that happen, right? But so often when we look at it, and we read it and we just breeze past, things that are of you know, utmost significance. Do you see what I'm saying? And so when we look at major events in the Bible and we try to understand them, we often understand them in narrative form only, right? We understand them as a story, and in the story, we don't always, or we can't always immediately ascertain the way that the characters in the story feel about the story, especially in the Bible, the way it's written. You don't always get the sentiment of the figure when you read the text, but at the same time, you have to maintain that the text is a human story, right? And so the human story that exists in the Bible about the end of the world is that there will be a remnant that survives all the way to the end. We know that, and we know the history of that because we've seen it happen before. But when we saw it happen before, did we consider the, I guess, the significance of the trauma that would be associated with such a world-changing event, right? And so when someone that is in the Vietnam War goes off to war and sees trauma, sees, bodies and heads blown off and all sorts of destruction from warfare, that person comes back home and has PTSD and may not be able to fit into society, may, not, you would say, be able to have a casual conversation with a regular person because, they've seen all of the worst that society has to offer. So what are you going to tell this guy? What are you going to talk about, right? And so a lot of times people come home from war shell shocked, and rightfully so, because they've just survived a situation with high trauma, right? So if you can imagine that times 1,000 when you're talking about the end of the world. And so when we think of the end of the world, we always think future. We don't necessarily think past, right? Because the end of the world is for us something that feels far away in the same way that for them it felt far away. Like when Yahusha says that as it was in the day of Noah, in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Yeah, they were eating and drinking and marrying and being merry, and then the flood waters came and wiped them all away. Imagine surviving that. Imagine that you're one of only 8 people on the planet that survive, you guys. That even thinking, conceptualizing the idea that the 3 boys, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, survived the most traumatic event in all of human history allows us to know that the event must have had a significant influence over their lives, right? We look at it as just a story. But when we do that, we remove the human element and we don't always get the full picture as to, what's going on, right? And so when we look at Shem, Ham, and Japheth and the things that they did after the flood, the places that they went, the style of person that they became to be, the style of nations that these children produce, we see a bit of the personality and the psychology come out in this flood trauma, that each of the sons deals with this trauma in a different way. And we'll see that, going forward. We know Noah, being perfect in his generations, was able to, speak to Elohim directly on this and understood the things that were coming and happening. And of course, the sons would have too, but they wouldn't have spoken directly with Elohim or had a relationship with Elohim, possibly, in the way that Noah did. So they're secondhand getting the information and are blessed from being with Noah. But we don't know the full personality or how the boys felt about the situation. Maybe they felt differently than their father. It turns out that some of the boys did, or of course there's only three, but that the boys may have had different approaches, right? And so we start there. We start with the most traumatic event in world history, in human history, is the flood. So traumatic that in the Bible, there's one word for it, is Mabel, right? There's another word for flood, and you guys forgive me if I don't remember the other word for flood, but this term Mabel is only used for the flood, right? So anytime you see Mabel in the text, it's not talking about any localized or any river swell or anything like that. It's talking about the worldwide flood that Elohim sent on the world to destroy it and build it back up again, right? That's Mabel. That's how important it is in the text. It has its own term and its own, terminology means it's a one-time thing, you guys. It's a one-time thing, right? That's how important it is. And so when we look at that, when we look at the significance of that, how did these three boys react on the other side, right? We know that Noah preached for 120 years. The men didn't listen until the rain started to fall. We know that Noah gathered his family up, went inside the boat with the animals, and Elohim shut the door, right? And then the rain started to fall. And the boys would have, in all likelihood, heard and experienced the happenings that were going on outside, right? They, in all seriousness, there would have been people scrambling and begging, and the boys may have heard that, right? Do you see what I'm saying? If you can imagine, and then these aren't boys either. We say boys. I say boys. So you think of it, kind of in a, because they're sons, right? You think of it. I've got sons, so I think of them as young men. But of course, these young men have wives. Do you see what I'm saying? So they're not young men. They're men. So these men would have experienced this heavy trauma. And as men, you deal with trauma in certain ways, right? You deal with it in, whatever way that you can, function with. Do you see what I'm saying? As a man, you have to function with the trauma that you have. And whatever method you use to deal with that trauma is what you use to deal with the trauma. As a man, you have to do that. You can't necessarily suppress it or do anything. You have to face it kind of head on. Do you see what I'm saying? And so when the ship lands on Mount Ararat and they are let out by Elohim, the boys do three different things. The men do three different things. First off, Japheth Let's just start with Japheth and his progeny. Japheth goes to the north and to the east, right? To the Caucasus Mountains. And that tells us a lot right there. His people occupy those mountainous regions, the tundra, the places to the far north, right? And I'll tell you this, you do not hear about them in history as having any significant impact for the next 2,000 years. You do not hear about them having a significant influence over world history at all. You barely even hear about them at all until about 1000 BC. So you don't hear about them for another 2000 to 2500 years after the flood, you guys. Do you see what I'm saying? You don't hear about Japheth and his people until way, way later. And that says something too. It tells you a little bit about the personality of Japheth. It lets you know that he feared another flood. And so instead of grouping with the rest of his family, instead of being closer to any other piece of civilization, Japheth took him and his family and moved into the mountains and stayed there for the next couple millennia. Japheth got his family, moved to the mountains, and stayed there for a very long time. So long, you guys, that they began to develop recessive traits. They began to develop recessive traits. You guys, we know that the sons of Japheth were, you've got Tiraz, you've got Magog, you've got Gomer, you've got Tubal, and I think you've got Meshach, right? I think those are the five. And so him, and it may have even been more than that. Let's check it out. We've got Genesis 10 right here. Let's check it out. And so let's look at it. And I hope that you guys can hear me. I'm trying to come through on the mic. I've got the sound cut down so that we won't have that problem again. It says in Genesis 10, starting at verse 2, it says, the sons of Japheth, or Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshach, and Tiraz. It looks like 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so there's 7. And so when you see these sons, you don't hear about them being in any form of world politic until about 1000 BC with the Greeks. We see history starting with the Greeks at around that time. This is the time of David. We know that Shemite history had been around way longer than that, but at around the time of David, 1000 BC, you get the Iliad, right? This is Homer's Iliad. This is the first piece of Greek writing that we can identify in history. And it's got fully developed stories and quote-unquote mythology, whether, all of it can be confirmed or some of it can be confirmed. We will never know, right? Or, we don't know now. But it is dated, Homer is dated to around 1000 to 1100 BC. And so if that's the first work, that's fairly late in terms of writing and in terms of developed society, because by that time there had been a lot of societies already developed: the Egyptians, the Assyrians, lots of other the ancient Sumerians. All of these people groups are already fully developed. The Ethiopians, fully developed before you get anything coming from the Greeks. And the Greeks are just one particular son, right? So you've got that line going through Javan, right? Javan, and then through Javan to some other groups there, through Javan to the Isles. You've got Kittim and then Tarshish and a couple other places. But this is where most of the Greeks come from. And Tiraz, right? So Tiraz is where the Thracians come from. These are most of your Greek peoples right here. And so you don't get them until about 1000 BC. You don't get them with developed culture and being able to converse and commerce with the surrounding peoples until about that time, you guys. And so when you see that, you know, okay, well, this is the time that the Greeks were becoming to be on the rise. And we know that the Medes, the Midianites, were, well, you say Medes, there's the Midianites and then there's the Medes. We know that the Medes were building civilizations and doing things in the Caucasus and southern Caucasus for a little while. They have some antiquity, but the bulk of the people of Japheth remained in the mountains, and they remained in the mountains for 2,000 years. So you're talking about Magog, you're talking about Rephath, you're talking about Tubal, you're talking about Meshach, that group of people there. Even Gomer as well. So that group, Togarmah, and I'm looking at them now. Those were the people that stayed in the mountains for an extended period of time. We know, we know this to be a fact, you guys, because there's no other explanation for the recessive traits. So if you're, okay, recessive traits can only pass on from intermingling with other people that have recessive traits. Otherwise, one person with dominant traits will destroy a person with recessive genes automatically. When you have a black, let's just say you have a black man and a white woman, and they have a child, right? The child is much less likely to come out with white skin than the child would to come out with dark skin. Do you see what I'm saying? The child will not have the skin color of the white person. That recessive trait to where that, you know, the style of albinism that, you know, causes white skin is destroyed after one generation. After that, the gene is switched back on and you begin to produce melanin again in one generation. So that means that what this means, you guys, is genetically, in order to maintain recessive traits, you can only be in an isolated area, and that's just pure genetic fact. There's no way around that. In order to maintain recessive traits, you can only do it in an isolated state where all the people around you have those recessive traits. And this is what we see, you guys. This is what we see in history with these particular people groups that have these recessive traits. Do you see what I'm saying? And so the other thing that you see that this particular people group has is a wild form of albinism, right? A form of albinism that comes from lack of sunlight. You see what I'm saying? So if you look at creatures that, and of course I'm not trying to make any comparisons here, but if you look at creatures that live in caves, you'll see that the longer that you are without sunlight, the more translucent skin becomes, the more light eyes become, the more light hair becomes, because that melanin is what absorbs sunlight. And so if you're not in any sunlight, you don't need the melanin, right? So your body being a machine, right? A machine that learns, it's like an AI itself, right? The more you exercise, there's something called epigenetics that, you know, these are genetics that will pass on from generation to generation based off of the work that you do in your lifetime, right? So that's why we know that it's nature and nurture. Do you see what I'm saying? A part of who you are and a part of what you go through. That's what makes up a person. So genetically as well, right? So in your lifetime, if you are subjected to heavy labor and, you know, working, you know, every day, then you develop muscles, right? But if it's something that came on, you know, and it wasn't gradually, it's something that you had to start doing right away, you know, your body is not prepared for it, and you may break down. You may develop the muscle that you need to do the job, But in the meantime, your body's breaking down. So what your body does, and this is what epigenetics is that it prepares the next generation to do the work that you did in your life. And this is what you develop when you work out and exercise, that epigenetic system in your body to pass it along to your children. Do you see what I'm saying? I had a buddy that was like diesel, like swole, and he said that he never ever worked out a day in his life. And the only way that that's possible is through this, epigenetic understanding of your body, that hey, the next generation will prepare itself for the work that the previous generation did by developing muscles. So hey, if your life is anything like your father's life, you'll be prepared in advance for the work, right? And so, like this, in that same fashion, epigenetics, what is a moth in here? Epigenetics works, you know, for other things too. So let's just imagine that you have a human being that's in a low light environment for generations. Do you see what I'm saying? How many generations would it take for that recessive trait to develop without you being in the cave? For that recessive trait to stick, no matter where you weren't going to start developing melanin because you had been in low light situation or no light situation for so many generations that you lost the ability to produce melanin in your skin, in your hair, and in your eyes. That would be the place where you would develop it, right? They would show in all three places. And this is what we see with Magogite people groups, the people that are coming from the Eurasian steppes, being the descendants of Japheth, right? Not all people from that area, but a large group of people that are Magogites from Japheth display these characteristics, and they can only come from being in isolation and being in low light environment. Those are the listen, you guys. Those are the only two ways that this happens. Genetically, it's the only way, because see, it doesn't exist to where that you cut the gene to produce melanin on. I mean, it does. It's the gene to produce melanin, right? And so that's the natural state, is producing melanin. There is no like lack, no melanin state. That's a not natural state. Naturally, the body produces melanin because it absorbs sunlight, right? So that's the original form. Anything besides that is something that's different. You can call it an evolution or whatever you want to call it. It's different. It's a tangent, right? And so because of that, it's recessive, right? That means that it's not the original. It's the improvement on this particular group because of some particular need, right? So it makes it recessive. This means it's weak in your gene because you may not need it. This is an adaptation. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's recessive. That's the way that the body works. So since it's recessive, that means if you mix it with any people group that's not like that, it disappears in a single generation. The only way that it's maintained is through isolation and through low light environment. That's it. And then if you take that same concept, if you look at that and say, okay, well, what other behaviors do this particular people group have, right? And I'm not meaning to pick on anybody because trust it. There's equal trauma to go around, right? Because that's what this is. This is a manifestation of flood trauma. If Magog takes on the same mindset as Japheth to say, I'm scared not only of the lowlands where the floods can reach, but also of other people who can continue to be sinful or who can continue to do whatever caused this in the flood in the first place. I'm gonna take my family and I'm getting the heck out of Dodge, right? And I'm gonna stay in the mountains, and I'm gonna tell them to stay in the mountains as long as they can. Don't even mix with the other people. You do you and do what you need to do to survive in these mountains. That mindset comes from trauma. You see what I'm saying? And we can see that in the behavioral patterns of the people that came from Japheth. This is the flood trauma that he experienced that is playing itself out in the lives of his sons and his grandsons, you guys. So much so that it changes their physical appearance because we know, right? Everybody knows originally that the three sons of Noah were black. Do you see what I'm saying? Noah was black. No, there's some scripture in Enoch that says he was white, but you guys got to recognize there's scripture in Song of Solomon that says Solomon was white. And you got to look at that word. I think it's Zahach. So it's, and I can look it up now, but it's a word. I think it begins with Zadi, right? And it means to glow, to shine white like milk, to be bright like milk. And when Solomon is being described this way, he's also described as being ruddy. So how can you be both red skin and shiny, right? And so the way that you can is when, black folks put lotion on. I mean, my face right now is looking kind of shiny. They call that white. And so when Noah is being described as having glowing face and glowing eyes and all of those things, this is the glow from supernaturalism, but not just from supernaturalism, but also from his fullness of body, his fullness of color. Do you see what I'm saying? Like an angel would. Do you see what I mean? And then this is, described in several other people. It's described in Stephen. It's described in Moses. It's described in a couple different people, right? And so when we see this, we think, okay, well, maybe this is where the whiteness comes from. Maybe Moses was not Moses, but Noah was not. I don't know. Noah was black. There was no white people on the face of the earth originally. This comes from isolation, and it comes from Japheth's personality, from being scared of the flood and running to hide in the mountains. It's flood trauma that we get the style of person that Japheth produces, all right? We see this. We see it. It's a wild concept, but we see it in the text, you guys. Not only that, in the particular areas where these physical traits would propagate, being in isolation and then being there for a long time, we know that the Caucasus Mountains are, like that. They're rough terrain. If you get through them, you're not going to get back out. Do you see what I'm saying? And we see even on the other side of the Caucasus, the Eurasian steppe. And this is where the Magogite people, multiply and become this numerous multitude like the sand of the sea that it describes in Revelation 20, right? So this is where they become multitudinous through this big, huge expanse of space that is hardly populated and hardly also populated with wildlife because it freezes over in the winter, right? So you've got to follow the weather from east to west and then back west to east as the winter comes in. So this makes for a nomadic lifestyle. It also makes for small tribal groups because there is a scarcity of food. There's plenty of space. So you can get in your small tribe and take off in a direction and never see nobody again because there's plenty of space. But if you're right on top of another group, you're going to have to fight for the food in the area because there's only so much, right? This is where the concept of being kicked out of the house at 18 comes from. That doesn't come from our people, even though we, champion ourselves in doing that sometimes. But it doesn't come from us. It comes from Magog, right? It comes from our interaction with with people of European descent. Do you see what I'm saying? Because this is how they were forced to behave because of the environment that their father lived in, right? The direction that he went, right? And we can argue on whether he was intended to go that way or this was his allotted property. Of course, Elohim allotted specific parts of the earth for each individual son, and Japheth's location was to the north, but he went deep. He went deep into the mountains and stayed there, you guys. This is a reaction to trauma, and we know that the largest trauma of all time is what these three boys went through, and that's what this is, you guys, for sure. So not only that, scarcity will build predatory behavior. So not only is the food scarce, but if you've got other groups coming around into your area, you've got to fiercely protect it, right? You've got to fiercely protect it. So that naturally develops a warrior mentality and a marauding mentality that, okay, not only am I going to move from place to place, if somebody comes into our region, we're going to destroy them, take what they got. If we go into somebody else's region, we're going to destroy them and take what they got, because we're predators. We got to be predatory. We can't stay in one place. There's only enough for just the people that we have with us. So we've got to think quickly, and we've got to overwhelm you before you realize that there's only enough food for just me and you. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is where that mentality comes from that we see in later generations of Magogites, like the Huns and the Goths and the Vikings, right? And the pirates, right? Because it doesn't stop at the Vikings. It continues on into English history with all these wild pirates that are all these conquistadors in Spanish history that are supposedly explorers, but they're actually Vikings. They're closer related to Vikings, and that's what they're going to do is conquer these lands on ships. This is the don't stay in one place mentality and keep moving and keep conquering, because you've got to survive. It's the predatory survival of the fittest mentality. I went through this in the last video, but it's called, and I still did not look it up, it's called humanism, but it's a style of humanism. And I can't remember what the name is, but it's Aldous Huxley and people like that. It's the eugenics and all of that is like, is it secular humanism? It's something like that. But it's where evolution ends up. Do you see what I'm saying? The concept of evolution in their minds is the survival of the fittest mentality. Do you see what I'm saying? The strongest survives. It's and I can't even remember. It's survival of the fittest is what they call it. The law of the jungle, right? That the strongest person wins. And this is why psychologically they have that mentality, even though they've codified it and made it and give it some scientific dressing, right? This is, Origin of Species, Charles Darwin territory, right? Because the most evolved then must rule over the lower evolved. Do you see what I'm saying? Because this is just the hierarchy of nature. This is how nature works. This is the way an animal would behave, right? This is the animal kingdom, and if you have to fight, and this is how you behave if there's scarcity, right? And not to belittle or call any group of people. This is out of their name. This is really just for information, and so that we can understand the things that happen in history are real historical events and have a aspect of humanity in them that we may not have noticed, right? We so often just see flood and just skip right by it as if this is not the most traumatic event in all of human history. And when we look at Shem, Ham, and Japheth and the way that they turn up, we look at the people groups that come from them and the mistakes that they made and say, oh, I would have never done anything like that. I would never be in no situation like that. But you don't know how you would be affected by such a traumatic event. Can you blame Japheth for taking his family and saying, hey, I'm out of here, right? I mean, regardless of what you think about how righteous or unrighteous it is, it seems like if you want to escape from the possibility of being in a flood again, head to the mountains. I can't remember where this story was. That Japheth was the last one to come down off of this. You see, and I don't remember where it is, but it reflects this personality in the way that the people groups that come from him behave later, you guys. It's flood trauma. It's residual flood trauma. Elohim knows what he's doing. Even this event is going to branch out like we talked about the butterfly effect the other day. And I thought thought the butterfly effect went like this. A butterfly flaps its wings in Peking and it snows in Tokyo. Something like that, right? I think that's what it is, right? And it's just this chain of events that if one thing happens in one place, then the wind current shifts and all of these different factors come into place to where on the other end, there's a snowstorm. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's what we're looking at in generational terms, in the ages of man, right? We see the effect of this traumatic event just being reiterated over and over again through time, through the sons of the original person that dealt with the trauma. This is what that is, you guys. And it's not just all reserved for Japheth, right? And Japheth doesn't isn't just getting all the smoke, right? Just got all the smoke for Japheth. It's the same thing with Ham, right? It's the same thing with Ham. Worse even with Ham. Do you see what I'm saying? Because Ham was mad, right? Ham wasn't like Japheth that, you know, was able to see and say, okay, well, I'm going to run and hide. Ham said, no, I'm going to fight. That's what Ham said. Do you see what I'm saying? The word Ham is Ham. It's Het Mem, if I'm not mistaken. And what it means is hotness, like hotness and anger and wrath. That's what it means. It means to be hot. You see what I'm saying? This is why ancient Egypt calls himself Kemet, because Kemet and Hamed are the same thing. Ham, right? It's like saying hams, right? And so with Ham, he was more angry. Even the term Hamas is the terrorist organization. That means violence, right? It comes from the word Ham, for this person, for the son of Noah. And his personality was much more hot-headed. And so instead, and we know this from, the event that we have, the recorded event, that, he walked in on his father and saw his nakedness and went and told his brothers and said, hey, look at our father, ha ha ha, look at his nakedness, right? And the two brothers, being good sons, didn't want to make fun of their father. They walked backwards and draped a blanket over him so that he wouldn't be exposed, right? And this is what gets Ham's son cursed. And people want to, regardless of what you think happened there, we know that people have their different assumptions on what happened. People say, okay, well, that's a harsh punishment for just, laughing at your father. Well, that's what you think. We don't know. You see what I'm saying? It's a big deal to disrespect your father. You see what I'm saying? And, people think that was more salacious than that. And we don't even have to go down that road. But regardless, you can see his personality bleed through, right? To where that, he's not, respectful of his father. Do you see what I'm saying? He has more of an attitude. He has more of an aggressive approach. You see what I mean? He almost seems angry, right? And so if you've got one son that says, I'm scared, I'm running for the hills, imagine the more aggressive son. What would he do? Would he be more angry? Would he look at his father in a different way? You've just lost every friend, every person that you've ever known. You've just seen you've just witnessed the death of, we don't know how many people were on the planet at that time, but We know lifespans were very, very long. So there could have been millions, there could have been billions of people, right? So we know it was a fully populated Earth. So can we assume billions? You just saw if it's comparable to the amount of people that we have on Earth today, that's 8 billion today. So if we assume, let's just say half of that, you just witnessed the death of 8 billion or 4 billion people. Half of that, 2 billion people, half of that. You've just witnessed the death of every living thing except for what you've got in the boat. And let's just say you are not a righteous man. Let's just say that you're angry. Let's just say you think Elohim made a mistake, right? Let's say that you have a theodicy, like you're judging Elohim. Who do you think you are for destroying this world? Maybe he loved that world. Do you see what I'm saying? We don't know why he comes out angry on the other side, but he comes out angry on the other side. His his name even means angry, right? And we see that anger manifest itself as being, as being mocking towards his father. We see a story, and I think this one is in Jasher, about Ham stealing the garment of Adam from his father, and then it passes down to Cush, and then to Nimrod, and Nimrod is using that to become a mighty hunter on the earth. You see what I'm saying? And so we see that this line of people, whether you see that, whether you believe that story or not, or whether you see Ham's hot-headedness or not, we know that the first nation of people, the first son to actually go out and conquer the world and put his name on the world is Ham. His people immediately get to work populating the planet and conquering it, right? I say planet, we know it's a plane, and conquering it. So it's the people that come from Ethiopia that conquered the planet first, right? It's the people of Cush, and we know this from Nimrod. And in the days of Nimrod, in this time, we have the Tower of Babel. So you have the most technologically advanced building structure, regardless of what style of building you believe that the Tower of Babel was. By all estimations in the ancient world, it was 3 days walk, 3 days breadth, right? So this is a huge building. Josephus said it could be seen for well beyond where it was at, and to make you think that it was close, but it was still very, very far away. Just a perspective angle that Josephus gives you lets you know the trueness, the realness of this building. Do you see what I'm saying? When we see that the building was done by all people, that Nimrod and his family were able to convince all men to build this tower. And the reason why is so that they could be higher, just like Japheth, be higher than the flood waters. But that's not the only reason. The other reason is so that they could physically attack Elohim, to go into heaven and attack Elohim, the people of the heavens. That was his goal. That was the sentiment of the world through the influence of Nimrod and the people of Ham, you guys. This is what we're dealing with. The anger associated from flood trauma, you guys. That flood trauma goes on to manifest itself and result in the separation of the languages of the earth, to where that now you can't even talk to your neighbor country anymore. You have to have a translator. The the cause of the catalyst of the different languages of the earth is flood trauma from angry Ham and his children striking out and saying, I'm not going to be flooded anymore. I'm going to attack Elohim before he attacks me. Like fools, right? Like fools. They foolishly thought that they could get the upper hand on Elohim. You say, we don't have all smoke for just the Europeans. The Africans too. Do you see what I'm saying? There's equal smoke for both parties, even for my own. We consider ourselves to be Shemites because of prophecy. And so Shem has some responsibility in it too. But Ham for sure. Ham goes on first. And here's the other thing. Because the building was so technologically advanced and required all of these measurements and all of this different material to make, you get from the people of Ham, wildly accurate and specific architecture like the pyramids. You get from, we know Mitzrayim is one of the four sons of Ham. Ham has, put Libya, Mitzrayim, and Cush. And we know pyramid building starts with the Ethiopians and then also with the Mitzrayims, right? The Egyptians. We know that the term chemical, or chemical, is because it's spelled with the CH, and this is where we get that sound in the English language. So we know that's one for one. That term chemical derives from hum, right? The term alchemy derives from alchemy. So the chemistry, this comes from Ham. This is the style of science that first comes from, that first is codified and becomes an actual science in the people of Ham. And it comes from, originally from having this style of flood trauma, that they delve into these sciences, and then with the sciences they create things that they try to use against Elohim. This is just the way that mentality is. And we know that was a factor. We know that is an aspect of Ham's personality by the way he treated his earthly father. You see what I'm saying? It's not surprising that his progeny would have animosity for the heavenly father, right? Like fools. And the same thing for Japheth, to think he could run from Elohim's judgment. That's foolish too. And so we see two aspects of this flood trauma that is manifesting itself in reality, and even in the present day. Because when we're in certain places in Africa, certain styles, you get that hot-headedness, you get that that warrior fighting mentality sometimes from some of these African places, because they're descendants of Ham. Even though we know sub-Saharan Africa is made up of more than just Ham. We know there's Shem and Ham in sub-Saharan Africa. That's why you'll find genetic matches in West Africa with some people who are still West Africans. They don't have to be Hebrews for you to genetically match with them. They could be sons of Abraham and you'll genetically match. They could be sons of Isaac and Isaac and they'll genetically match. We know Abraham had 6 other sons, right? We know Isaac had 1 other son. Do you see what I'm saying? And that son had 12 sons. So they'll be close. They'll be Hebrews, right? They'll be Hebrew Edomites. They'll be Hebrew Ishmaelites. They won't be Hebrew Israelites, but they will match in genetics enough to show that there is a relation there. And that's why we are related to some people in Africa, because there's a lot of Shemites in Africa. Well, there's a lot of Hamites too. And Ham and Shem, we know from ancient history that they looked alike. But, those two particular brothers were particularly looked alike, especially Mitzrayim and Israel. Do you see what I'm saying? We know that from 2,000 years of history in the Bible alone, right? From Joseph to Paul, Israelites are being confused for Egyptians, right? And so we just say that to say that the skin color isn't what matters. It's the personality of the son, the way that that they dealt with this trauma, this flood trauma. Elohim knows what he's doing and knows the chosen vessels from the ones that aren't, and how those chosen vessels are going to behave and how they're going to walk themselves out, and can see how it's playing out, from the very beginning, right? This is just like a cause and effect. It's a catalyst for this grand equation that is playing out before us, but is already finished in the eyes of Elohim, right? So when we look at Shem, so Shem is the last son, right? And we get a couple things from Shem too, right? And so when we look at it, we look at Shem and we say, okay, well, this is the good son. Well, yeah, but not necessarily, because he has some wild people that come from him too. And even though they stay generally in the area of Ararat and in some of the surrounding regions, you still have them go through their levels of disobedience too. Even though you do have a righteous line that comes from this line. You got Shem, Arphaxad, and then on down that line you get to Eber, where we get Hebrew, and then Peleg, and then all the way down to Abraham, where you get your righteous man, right? Everybody else besides Abraham is unrighteous. You got the Aramites, you've got the Elamites, you've got a whole bunch of other different people that go different ways and cleave to different things. But what's interesting is that this particular son's name is Shem. And through this line of people, this is the line that Mashiach will come, the man who bears the name of Elohim, Yahweh. Do you understand? That word Shem literally means name, right? And so it doesn't just mean name. It's Shin Mem, right? And so with Shin Mem, that is name, Shem, right? But if you pronounce it Sham, which there's really no diacritic mark, so it may be pronounced Sham, it may still be Shem. So without any diacritic marks, with the same spelling, you have the word there, like place that chair there, right? So that's also Shem or Sham. So the word to put, like if I'm going to put something somewhere, is the word Shem, with a yod between a shin and a mem. And so you can see how those three words connect Hebraically in grammar, because Shem is name, Shem is put, and Sham is there, right? So it's almost as if he put his name there. And that's literally what we see in the text, that Shem carries the name of Elohim all the way down. And if it's forgotten in the earth, which Elohim says it wouldn't be, then Elohim himself comes down and gives it to mankind again. You see what I'm saying? This is where the I am that I am, or I am who I am, comes into play. This is, Exodus chapter 3, verse 15, where it says, moreover, he says unto Moses, tell the children of Israel that I am Yahweh, the Elohim of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. That is my name, and that is my memorial to all generations, right? Moses is who he's telling this to, and Moses is a descendant of Shem, right? But we see this played out in wicked aspects too, right? Because we also see that other people that come from Shem and from Arphaxad, right? The Babylonians, the Chaldeans, and some of the other people groups, the Aramites, right? The people that Aramaic comes from, the language. You've got this focus on Aramaic, right? At one point in time, Aramaic is the lingua franca, that everybody speak in Aramaic, right? Or a form of Aramaic, a form of Phoenician. People say, okay, well, it comes from Phoenicia, and Phoenicia is from Ham. But Aramaic begins to be the same style and begins to be the more popular language, right? Even going forward after that. forms of Aramaic. Hebrew in itself is a form of Aramaic. They're forms of each other. It's a Semitic language, right? And so we see the focus on words and the technology of words and the word, literally, and the people of Shem. And we see them go this way and that way with it, and go into all this paganism with it as well, with some of the other nations and even with Israel. But the the concept is that Elohim chose this particular person, and it's in the person's even named name, and his flood trauma is to cleave to the name of Elohim, right? Like a strong tower, because we know that Elohim is the one that saved him from the flood. Because we know that he knew, it's taken us a long time to get it. He knew that Elohim is the one that brought them through, regardless of anything else. Whether you want to be mad at it or whether you want to be afraid of it, Elohim is the one that you rely on. That comes through Shem, and whether people have taken it from Shem or people of Shem have taken it and turned it this way and that way and used it for all sorts of other witchcraft, which they did. The Chaldeans were known for their ability to read the stars, right? They were sorcerers, and they were the people that were the first astrologers, right? They're the ones, it's from Abraham and his people, that really taught the Egyptians, right? So it's the Chaldeans, that Chaldean star craft, right? That really you get not only the language of man, but also the language of the heavens as well. All of that working in together through this word, right? This is where you get Shem, right? And the other part, the other aspect that becomes skewed as well is that in the book of Josephus, that Josephus talks about Adam, and that Adam had prophesied that there would be two great devastating events where the world would be destroyed. One with water and one with fire. You guys can look this up. Josephus talks about it. And so the children of Seth, the righteous line, knew this and said, okay, well, since our father prophesied that these things were going to happen, we need to prepare for this. And so the way that we're going to prepare for it is, hey, we know the courses of the stars. We're able to look at the course of the stars, and we can see the long count. There's a 600-year long count, that because they had these long lives, they were able to see all the permutations of the heavens and mark them on these pillars, right? And so there were two pillars that the sons of Seth, the righteous sons of Seth, made in the days before the flood, right? One of them made of brick and one of them made of stone, because the one that is made of brick would have survived the fire, because the fire is going to be at the end of the world, and then the one of stone would survive the flood, and because the flood is going to be first. So since Adam knew that there was going to be two major destructions, they made these one brick and one stone pillars, and they wrote all the calculations of the stars and the long count of the stars, and I suppose what you could call the zodiac, wrote all that down on these two pillars so that the successive generations would not forget these measurements, right, from all of this destruction that's coming. And so the sons of Seth did that, and through that righteous line continued it forward. Josephus even says that in his era, pieces of those pillars still stood in Lebanon to that day. Lebanon, not far from Ararat, if I'm not mistaken in my geography. Do you see what I'm saying? And so with this group of people, the Shemites, being close to this information, it is not out of the question. It is not unheard of. It follows that the Chaldeans, their descendants, happen to be experts at it, because this is the word, the name, the language of the stars. All of that goes together, and all of it reflects the personality of Shem, who is cleaving to his father, cleaving to the name of Elohim, cleaving to Noah as well. Noah means comfort. That word means comfort. And then staying closer to his father and experiencing more prophecy and more from being in his father's presence, right? As we all do from being in the presence of the Father. Not to say that anybody else can't, because you don't come from Shem, automatically you display these other characteristics and that means that you're doomed. No, absolutely not. We know that all men on earth heard the message of Noah, right? Including his sons. So that all men, there's flood stories in every culture in the entire world. So everyone knew Yah-oh at one point in time, you guys. Everyone did. And because of that, we know that in the end, that there will be all men, all people from all walks of life, from all generations and all languages and all tongues. Do you see what I'm saying? Because the end is going to happen again. And the trauma from the fire trauma is not going to be like the flood trauma. The fire trauma, scripture says that it will be a rejoice. That's going to be the difference going forward. That the fire trauma from the next time this happens, it's not going to be just 3 men. It's going to be an entire kingdom. And the kingdom will rejoice when the wickedness is removed from it. All of these 3 men's children that were not disobedient, whether they come from any of them, whatever their complexion may be, whatever their nationality may be, if they are disobedient, if they don't hear that voice, then they will be destroyed in the fire too, you guys. That's what this represents. That in the end, the fire trauma is not a trauma at all. It's a rejoicing in a new world, with a new heaven and a new earth, with a king and an Elohim, Yah-oh, and then Yahusha. Hallelujah. That is just a psychological approach to the historical events of the flood and proves the historicity of the event by the characteristics of the children that emerged from it. Shalom, shalom, y'all.
Interpreting the news from a Hebraic perspective, this is Sadiqa Selah with Hebrew News. Stay tuned.